Come on in.
And we have more chairs. We do have more chairs.
We have probably 6, 7, 8, 9 chairs right up here, if anybody wants to sit in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Hi. So I want to say thank you to all of you for being here, and also thank you to Mary Meeting Arts Center for just putting on such a creative and inclusive Smelt Festival. We're probably the only town in the world that has a Smelt Festival. Right? Yes, it's special. So in early December, I threw out kind of a random theme to some prospective storytellers, and that theme was creatures, because I thought a lot of us in Bowdoinham have creature stories. And when a few storytellers and I met in the space about 10 days ago, and they practiced their stories for each other, someone said, you know, it seems like the real theme is calamity. And that makes sense, really, because how many of you remember the stories about creatures where everything went great? Right? Whether it's your creatures or your neighbor's creatures or wild creatures, we usually remember the stories where things went really wrong. And calamity, for anyone who doesn't know what calamity means, is like, it's like a fun disaster, in a way. Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to open with someone who has been smelting since forever. And we're opening with him because I want to put out a call for you to tell your story, your first memory of smelt fishing, if so inclined, after our lineup tonight. So if you just want to come up and grab the mic and tell like a 1-minute story, it can be longer, but I want you to know it can be short so you're not intimidated when I call on you, even if you don't raise your hand. So we're going to start with Sam Tome. And Sam has always had land in Bowdoinham and lived here a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a Bowdoinhamer.
He's a Bowdoinhamer. He worked at VIW for 42 years and raced canoes for 20 of them.
Wow.
Come on up, Sam.
Okay.
Can
Can I hang on to my coffee?
You can if you
I
want.
feel more comfortable with coffee in my hand. I don't know how to use a microphone. Is this working?
Yes.
And I see they started me out with creatures of calamity and put me up first. So I said I fit the pistol. I was going to say, I was born in 1950. The river didn't freeze over until the day I was born on January 16th.
Wow.
So it doesn't always freeze early, okay? And my mom said it's been cold on this earth ever since. That's a start. My dad had a smoke camp for us down in Valentine's, had 9-inch holes so we couldn't fall through. We were like 4 or 5 years old, and the women would open up the door and go, "That's so cute, look at these little guys." So we'd stay in the little camp and couldn't fall in the holes. Then he had another camp down there at Valentine's, and he tied ropes to us, so we couldn't fall down the hole. So we're feeding firewood into the stove and caught the fabric on fire. So the next thing you know, there's snow flying through the back of the camp, and Dad's out there shoveling snow on the camp trying to put it out. He said, "That's my boys in there, burning the camp down and fishing at the same time." Let's see. Excuse me. How many people are familiar with the second middle grounds? Upriver. Many of you? Well, we used to fish up there, and I'd sell the fish back in school, and I got school clothes for it. And I'd get about 50 pounds at a tide and sell them to George Broad here in town. And that's when we had the freight train stopping here in town. And I'd get 50 cents a pound, he'd get 60 cents a pound for packing and putting them on the freight train and shipping them to Boston. So, which was good money for me back then. And George sold live suckers. Down in his basement, he had a tank, old George Braun. And that makes the best smelt fishing bait is sucker versus worms. So you go down and get a sucker, and once in a while George would have one sucker left with a little light bulb in his dip net, trying to catch that one lousy sucker in this big tank, chasing it all around. "I know I got one in there," he says. "I'll get it for you." Anyways. Then when I'd be walking back down the river towards the Brooklyn Bridge, and when you're dragging 50 pounds of smelts on a sled, it's very arduous. It takes forever. And you look up on this straightaway out here, and it seemed like you never got any closer to the bridge. You never wanted to look up. You just kept your head down and kept digging, you know what I mean? So. Let me see. And I caught a 14-inch brook trout up at the second middle grounds. We used to stock the brooks at my uncle's and dump trout in all the brooks around here, and they migrated down to the river. So I got one of them trout back anyways, while I was smelt fishing. Anyone familiar with Center's Point? Out by Brick Island? You ever seen where they had camps out there? Because we used to have a camp out there. And you could get 50, 60 pounds out there. And the worst thing you could do is you sit 6 hours in a warm snow camp, and you come out of the camp, walk across that big cove, across the game management fields, head for the house, which is at the end of the Wild Road, and you're walking head first into that cold wind, nighttime, and you're going, oh, you just do not leave the camp, because it's so nice and warm, you know what I mean? And you dreaded to walk home. And I don't know if you people know that, but female smelts are a lot larger than male smelts. We used to catch them and sell it by the pound. So females would give you about 8 smelts to a pound. Males would be 12 or 13 to make a pound. So if you're catching a lot of females, you're doing good. You can rack them up fast to poundage if you're selling them, you see what I'm saying? And do you people know the longer a smelt stays in the river, it bleaches out? It loses its color?
No.
Yeah, and they get wormy. The longer they stay in the fresh water, they get wormy, and you got to hold them up to light, make sure there's no worms in them. When they first come in, you got to check them for worms. By the end of February, you better be holding them up and see if there's worms in them. You cut the worms out unless you don't mind getting a little extra protein. And I hate to say it, folks, that's all I got.
Thank you, Sam.
You're welcome.
Before you head out, you might want to know that part of Mike Mahan's bio is that he's the proud owner of a 1985 GMC 3/4 ton pickup, which was originally owned by Bert Tome.
Yeah, my dad.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
How come I never got it?
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. In our next story, the creature is not from the animal kingdom. It is a motorcycle. Other details about Mike Mahan. He moved to Maine in 1969, so he's still from away. Mike.
Thanks. Great to be here. So my story takes place in 1970. I was working summers at an estate over in Woolwich. I was working as a chauffeur and kind of an outside yard guy. And one day I got a call from my sister, my older sister Catherine, who was living in Washington, D.C. And she was living down there with her hippie boyfriend John and about 12 other people in a large Victorian in the Georgetown section. And she was, I think, working in a bakery. And I remember my dad saying, "So, 4 years at Georgetown University, and this is what I get?" So, anyway, her hippie boyfriend John was trying to simplify his life. And so he had already simplified his life by giving me his surfboard. And apparently the surfing in the Potomac wasn't very good. So he gave me the surfboard, and the reason for my sister's call was that in further simplifying his life, he wanted to get rid of his motorcycle. And so my sister said, he says it doesn't work and you can have it. So the next Saturday, I borrowed a friend's muscle car. It was a 1968 Dodge Coronet 440. And about 8 hours later, John and I were loading the Yamaha Enduro 175 dirt bike into the trunk of the Dodge. So I took it a little easier coming back, and the front end of the Yamaha was sticking out the back of the Dodge and had a piece of clothesline holding it down. But I did notice that the car maneuvered a little better with the extra weight in the back. So anyway, Sunday when I got back to Woolwich, I slept for a while and got up and had something to eat, and then I went out and started tinkering around with the bike, trying to see if I could get it going. And I looked at the shut-off valve and fuel line, and it was in the closed position. And I opened the valve and the fuel line and started up the bike and started tearing around the yard and through the woods and the fields and having a great time. And so I took the bike back to Bowdoinham, and my buddies and I had a good time seeing how many people you could ride on a dirt bike. And turns out 3. Anyway, one of my buddies had what he referred to as a real motorcycle, and it was a BMW 500, which in fact was a very sweet bike. And he started giving me grief about my little dirt bike, and he said, you really need a real motorcycle. You should have a street bike. And I said, well, you know, I've always really wanted a Triumph Bonneville 1967 650. And he said, well, let's find one. So we started looking in the classifieds, and it was all Hondas and Yamahas and Suzukis. But eventually we found an ad, and I can't remember the exact details, but it was something like large motorcycle, good condition, color black, $600. And there was a phone number for Union. So I called the number, and a woman answered and said she didn't know anything about the motorcycle, but her husband did, and she gave me directions. So the next day, my buddy and I took the BMW up to Union, and we got to Union and then followed the directions, and we kept going down roads that got smaller and smaller, and then they turned to dirt, and then they kind of turned to trail. And we eventually came to a kind of ramshackle farm with a farmhouse and big barn and a bunch of outbuildings. And so this old guy, he must have been 50. He comes out of the house and it ascertains correctly that we're there to look at the motorcycle. And so he said, okay, follow me. And so we trekked across over to one of these outbuildings that looked like it was about ready to fall down. And it was dark inside, and we go in there, and looking around, we see over in the corner what looks to be what might be a motorcycle with a big old tarp over it. And so the old man stops and turns around and looks at us and says, well, this is my son's bike, and I told him, you're going to kill yourself on the damn thing. And he said, nah, when I get back from NAM, I'm going to ride this thing to San Francisco and find myself a hippie chick. And so the old guy says, well, he came back from NAM all right in a box. And this bike's been sitting here for 3 years, and every couple of months I go out and start it up and keep the battery charged, because that's what he would want. So anyway, he then proceeds to pull the tarpaulin off, and sitting there in the junky old shed is a 1958 Harley Davidson Sportster XLH in absolutely mint perfect condition, very low miles. So the guy swings his leg over and gets on the bike and kick-starts it, starts with the first kick. So my buddy at this point is practically pissing his pants. And he looks at me and says, "You must buy this motorcycle. You would be crazy not to buy this motorcycle." And of course, I'm thinking I would be crazy to buy this motorcycle. At the time, Harleys, at least in my mind, were sort of bikes of frights and misfits, and I wanted to triumph in a classy motorcycle. Anyway, my buddy and the old guy started talking and talking some more, and pretty soon I'd handed over the $300 that I brought as a down payment, and the old guy explained that we could come back tomorrow with the other $300, but we could take the bike today. And I mentioned that was generous, but wasn't worried about whether you'd get the other $300. He says, "No, I trust you, and I know where to find you." So anyway, now up to this point, it hadn't dawned on me that now I would have to drive the motorcycle back to Brunswick. And at the time, the only motorcycle I'd ever driven was the little 175 Yamaha, which is a pretty little bike. So I guess if I were to describe the ride from Union back to Brunswick in one word, it would be terrifying. Got on the bike, and it was hard just to keep the thing upright, particularly on the dirt roads. But the worst thing was I just wanted to go. And I'd look down, and I'd be doing 60 in second gear. And eventually I did make it to Brunswick, and the next day when we went back to bring the guys other $300, my buddy drove the Harley and I rode shotgun. But eventually I did get so that I was pretty comfortable on the bike, and tooling around mid-coast, and every once in a while I'd drive down to Massachusetts to see my parents. And what I did notice was that whenever I pulled into a gas station, gas up, or a convenience store, I'd attract people that I normally didn't attract. And I got invited to pig roasts, and keg parties, and so on. So anyway, I decided one sunny summer afternoon that I'd head down to Massachusetts to see my folks. And I think I was in about Amesbury on 495, heading south, and I noticed that my right boot was starting to get really hot. And so I looked down, and my boot was just covered with oil. And I thought, better pull over. So I pulled over in a breakdown lane, and got off, shut the bike down, got off it, and as I shut it down, I heard this incredible metallic clank. And I thought, not good. So as I was standing there with the bike, pondering my predicament, I happened to look up and over to the northbound lane. Now, you have to listen to this carefully because it's something you'll probably never witness. So there's a car, an old sedan, heading north on 495 in fairly heavy afternoon traffic. The car pulls over into the northbound breakdown lane and turns around, and at a relatively high rate of speed drives back down the northbound breakdown lane heading south until he comes to a authorized vehicles only crossover, at which point he crosses the 4 lanes of northbound 495 traffic, then the lanes of southbound 495 traffic, goes into the southbound breakdown lane heading north at a high rate of speed until he comes up to me and my motorcycle and comes to a stop. So this tall guy in full motorcycle club leathers gets out of the sedan, and he walks up and he says, "Something wrong with your scooter?" So I explained to him what I knew, and he paused for a minute and he said, "Not good." So he says, "We got to get this baby some help." So he goes out into the southbound traffic and starts waving his arms madly. And eventually a car with a couple of guys in it pulls over, and they're probably thinking, "This looks interesting." So the two guys get out of their car, and the biker immediately starts barking directions. "Okay, you two. Okay, you're gonna get the rear end. Okay, kid," that would be me. "You and I, we're gonna get the front end. Okay, we're gonna ease it into the trunk." And as we're easing it into the trunk, the back end of the sedan is sinking about 6 inches. So we're lifting it up, and he says, "Easy, watch the paint, watch the paint." So we get the bike into the trunk of the old sedan, and at that point I look up and I notice that there's a woman in the front seat of the sedan. And she's sitting there kind of staring at the windshield. And it's as if there's a movie playing on the windshield. She's just got this blank expression looking straight ahead. And all of a sudden the biker yells out, "Julie, Julie, give me your bra. I need your bra, Julie." So Julie turns like halfway around and goes, "What, hon?" And he says, "Julie, I need your goddamn bra. Give me your bra." So she says, "Okay, hon." So Julie gets up out of the sedan and maneuvers her bra out from under her Harley-Davidson t-shirt and hands it over to the biker, who uses the bra to tie down the trunk lid. So the biker then says, "Okay, now we gotta find a garage." And at that, he looks up at the two guys that helped load the bike into the trunk and he says, "What are you guys looking at?" So Julie and the biker and I piled into the sedan, headed south on 495 until we could find a garage. And we did find one, and we pulled in, and the biker gets out, and there's this one guy at the garage, and he says, "I gotta borrow some tools. Help me get this bike out of the trunk." And so the three of us managed to get the bike out, and I think the guy at the gas station decided it was maybe not a good idea to argue with this guy. So we get the motorcycle into the bay of the garage, and pretty soon there's tools all over the place, and you can hear him cursing, and every once in a while he'd say something like, "Where's that goddamn 7/16 socket?" And he's swearing and everything, and then gradually the swearing stops, and he finally stands up and he says, "There, you bastard." And he looks at me and he explains, he says, "Well, if you keep it under 45, you're only running on one cylinder, so keep it under 45, but you should be able to make it home." And then he goes on to explain in detail. He says, "Well, you blew a lifter seal. She pissed out all the juice. It's a good thing you pulled over when you did. Oh, and you're going to need a motor job." With that, he carefully put all the tools away, thanked the guy at the gas station, and told me that he and Julie were off to the pig roast. So I thanked him profusely and offered him what little cash I had in my wallet. And he said, "Oh, no. And he's got this big greasy hand. He cuffs my ear and he's rubbing my ear and my hair. He says, "Nah," he says, "any kid on a scooter's a friend of mine." So I did, in fact, make it home, and a couple days later I sold the Harley for $800. And that was the end of my life as a biker.